And welcome back into the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. George Bremer, Ryan Hickey here with you. All right, George, so you were at the Colts facility on Wednesday. We heard for the first time, at least since meeting the players, Shane Steichen meet the media, and we heard DeForest Buckner talk. We've heard Michael Pittman Jr. talk. I think there's some really interesting quotes and questions to discuss on this podcast coming out of those media days. And let's start with this, George. DeForest Buckner, I thought had some really interesting comments in terms of a reporter yesterday threw out the R word, rebuild. And he said, I hate that word. I do not want to hear the word rebuild. That just makes my skin crawl. And so it kind of brings up the question and the discussion going forward here is, what is the direction of the Colts? I would think right now they're in a rebuild. DeForest Buckner clearly thinks that's not the case whatsoever. Here in DeForest Buckner talk, we'll get to Michael Pittman Jr. and Shane Steichen's comments as well here from Wednesday, George. But do you feel, at least after kind of having the first few days of the Colts meeting and kind of getting together for the first time as a team, do you get the idea or do you get the sense that there's a unified direction of where this team is heading?
No, I think that's been one of the biggest things for me about this offseason. We've talked about it a couple times, that they haven't really picked a lane. You haven't seen them do a full on fire sale and get rid of, any of their aging assets and try to bring in draft picks and build that way. But at the same time, they haven't gone all in. You didn't see them, make some major free agency signings, especially on offense. That to me is the biggest surprise. This offense last year struggled mightily. I don't think that's breaking news to anybody. I don't think anyone's going to be stunned by that. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that statement. They were 31st or 32nd in pretty much all the major categories, the ones that really count, scoring and yardage and anything that is production based. And I think even if you go into the advanced stats, they were well into the lower quartile of the league. And you look around at, the offseason moves, what's changed on offense right now? We touched on this a little bit, on the previous pod this week. So if people want to go back to the Tuesday pod, get a little more in depth on that discussion. But, as we said then, it's hard to look at any area of the offense right now and say it's better than it was when they walked off the field in January with a loss to the Texans. The one thing that they're kind of counting on is the quarterback, and that's what it feels like it's all built around right now. If you go back through Chris Ballard's comments throughout most of 2022, the thing he brought up first about why they were struggling was turnovers. And obviously a lot of that had to do with Matt Ryan. There's no question about that. And all the quarterbacks really turned it over quite a bit while they were out there. Ellinger waited until the last game to do it, but they all ended up having pretty at least one bad game with ball protection. Is that, I don't know, am I off base here, or is that really seem to be what their primary focus has been? That they think they can bring in a quarterback, protect the ball a little bit better, and it's going to fix most of the offensive problems.
Here's what I'll say. I would agree that right now their offseason moves have not shown you at least a true direction of where they're going, because in one sense, you trade Stephon Gilmore. Okay, that should signal this team's going to try to tear it down. But then in the next breath, Kenny Moore still on the team, even Ryan Kelly, a guy that has a high salary, is not right now, or at least recently, last year and a half, 2 years, have played up to that salary. I thought they would be kind of
kicker.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Right. You go all in on signing a kicker, which you would think would be a finishing playoff team caliber move. Instead, you give the richest contract from a free agent to a kicker for a team that I would say right now is bare minimum 2 years away from being legitimate playoff contenders. But I think when you look at the Colts roster, I don't think there's that many areas in terms of you could actually tear down, because they still have a lot of relatively young talent. Like even DeForest Buckner, he said he doesn't want to rebuild, and he said he kind of saw Stephon Gilmore entering year 12, Buckner himself entering year 8, and he says we're basically at two different places in our career. I still have more time, essentially, where Gilmore's trying to win now. And he's 29 years old. I don't think there's a lot of moves you could have made to kind of really tear it down. Like if you look at the Colts roster, yes, they are banking on a rookie quarterback to change things. I also think a lot of it is a belief in Shane Steichen to change things as well. And I like that gamble, because if you look at this roster, you're not getting rid of Jonathan Taylor right now, nor should you. You should not get rid of Michael Pittman Jr. You obviously have Alec Pierce just coming off a rookie year. You look at the offensive line, you're not getting rid of Quentin Nelson. You have Bernard Ryman as a tackle right now you start to believe in. You have Braden Smith, who is a rock at right tackle. You're not moving him. Again, Ryan Kelly, I think, is up for debate, fair, and I would have traded him if I was Chris Ballard, but he's still, again, relatively young. And on the defense, you have DeForest Buckner, who's 29. You moved on from Unique Ngakoue, who was on the, a little bit older, but again, you want to move him or not bring him back because that's kind of more of a win now move. Okay. You have Shaq Leonard coming back. You have a very young and inexperienced secondary. Like, I just think in terms of ripping it down and going into what the Texans did recently in a full-on rebuild, I just don't think the Colts are there roster-wise because they don't have a lot of aging veterans and they don't have a lot of guys that, frankly, have a lot of trade value outside of Jonathan Taylor, and I would not trade Jonathan Taylor. So, that's the tough part, I guess we'll say, in terms of direction, where I think right now, I guess I would call more of a retooling and putting your eggs and banking on the fact that Shane Steichen can get the most out of this rookie quarterback to where, again, not this year, not next year, but I would say at that point in 2025, you can legitimately consider yourself a playoff team. I guess if you're DeForest Buckner, if I was him, would I want to sit through another 2 years of figuring it out? Honestly, probably not. But he's also not right now that discontent. So I understand the direction is a little hazy just because of the way the offseason moves. In one area would signal one thing and another area signal another. I just don't know what Chris Ballard could have done in terms of roster-wise to signal we're going all out in a rebuild because there's just not a lot of guys with value you can move on from and get, in the span of an offseason, maybe 3 first-round picks for if you're just offloading everybody.
That's a really good point, too. And, after the Gilmore deal was done, trading Kenny Moore would have been devastating for this team. I mean, we've talked already about how thin the cornerback spot is. If you ship Kenny Moore off as well, you're even in a worse spot there. To kind of carry on with your theme. So really, Ryan Kelly, they've obviously got some belief in him that he can get back to where he was. And I know he's one of the leaders of this team, not just on the field, but, he's on the executive board for the union. Maybe that played into a little bit, not that you're going to keep those guys because of that, but the idea that I think there's a lot of respect in this locker room for him, that he's one of the guys that carries, even with his struggles recently, that carries a lot of responsibility on his shoulders in that locker room. Maybe that played into why he's still here. But yeah, I mean, and if you look at the other sell-off moves, quote unquote, that weren't Stephon Gilmore, everybody knew Bobby Okereke was not coming back.
Right.
That was, that writing was on the wall with the money that they've already spent at linebacker, how much a third linebacker is going to play in season, and Zaire Franklin coming on the way he did. I don't think there was a path for bringing back Okereke. And even with Paris Campbell, in my understanding, that was more of his decision than the team's decision. That he was just kind of ready to move on, get some stability at quarterback, which I think is understandable. So I don't know that. Could you point to any other move on the roster right now that was like a rebuild kind of move?
No, I'm just thinking right now, and honestly, if you just take away the Matt Gay move for a second, let's just pretend it didn't happen, or just put it off to the side. I don't think Chris Ballard has made a lot of moves that at least are indicative of, hey, we're going for it, which in that sense, again, when you look at the roster, I don't think you have to strip it down, basically. I don't think you have to do what the Texans did and for 2 years have a fire sale and trade anyone with value and rip it all down and get a million picks and hope to build it up. Let me ask you this, George, at least. Do you buy that rebuilds work in the NFL? Do you buy that stripping it down to the studs, getting almost anyone with value off the roster and basically building it back up? Do you buy that philosophy actually works in terms of creating a winning football team 5 years down the road?
Yeah, it's interesting, I think, because we haven't seen a whole lot of it. I mean, it feels like people talk about it more often than it actually happens. I'm trying to think. The two that come to mind right away were the Colts in 2012, but that was even more salary cap driven. It wasn't a decision they sat back and said, let's just, strip everything from the Manning era and restart, with this new head coach and new GM. they were in a really bad salary cap spot. And so it made financial sense for them to release or not re-sign a bunch of those guys. Um, so I don't think that was even a willing rebound. You know what I mean? That was sort of
Right. Almost
forced by
luck.
the
Right.
economics of the league. So the only other one I can really think of is Miami, which they're still going through. And I think the jury's still out on that one. They're definitely better now than they were when they started the rebuild, but they have one playoff appearance, I think, during that stretch, and they haven't won a game yet. Buffalo seems to be in control of that division. We'll see, if they can kind of get into that a little bit, if Miami can chip away at that a little bit. But right now, it's the Bills division. And when you look at the AFC overall, they're what, 6, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that range. They're not at the top of the AFC. They're not one of the teams that immediately comes to mind as a Super Bowl contender. So I would argue that it hasn't worked. I think at least lately, what works in the NFL, ironically, didn't work for years either, has been the big spending sprees. What the Rams did, what the Bucks did. I mean, those two teams really brought in veteran quarterbacks and sign what the Jets are trying to do this offseason.
Right.
Has been really more effective than a complete and total rebuild. I don't know. I think it still comes down to quarterbacks, and I think that's the one sort of thing that everything's centered on in this league. Do the Rams and Bucks get away with what they were doing if they didn't get the seasons out of Stafford and Brady they did in those Super Bowl runs? Would the Colts, quote unquote, rebuild in 2012 have worked if Andrew Luck wasn't statistically one of the best rookie quarterbacks in the history of the league? I think it all comes down to that spot. If you get outstanding, because again, who's going to follow Kansas City's model from this year? The way to win the Super Bowl is let your best receiver walk and then have the best quarterback on the planet and win it all. Like,
with the Hall of Fame head coach, by the way, too.
With the Hall of Fame head coach. Like, I think the only constant in all of this is not just good play from your quarterback, but elite play, at least in that season, from the quarterback. I hate to say nothing else matters, but the league's almost showing you that it's pretty close to that.
And like you've highlighted, like rebuilds can work. I don't think they work as much as people actually think. And again, outside of the Matt Gay move, which is a little just head scratching, and the salary he got, I think right now the Colts' direction in sort of running it back and almost being in a wait and see. Let's see how this roster with Shane Steichen develops. Let's see how a lot of these young players who last year played poorly. Was it a one-off? Or can they rebound? Like, again, can Michael Pittman Jr., I think a lot of his struggles last year, you could point to the quarterback carousel. Jonathan Taylor, same thing. You could point to Quentin Nelson. Was he just had a bad year? Or did he have a bad year because the left tackle was in and out, inexperienced, or just bad? Ryan Kelly had a down year. And the right guard was also a turnstile. Like, I don't mind where the Colts are roster-wise right now. And a lot of the age of the guys on the roster, I don't think I like where the Colts are right now direction-wise, and I don't think you have to declare we're in a rebuild, and obviously they're not going for it. And thank God this is the first. That's, I think, the one clear direction we can get from this year.
Mm-hmm.
It's obvious they're not going for it, and that's the right move to make. But it's like even look in the division. Oh, sorry, George, you can go.
No, I was going to say, I think along those lines too. I think they're relying a lot on internal improvement. Like we were talking about, the quarterback is a huge piece of this puzzle. The new head coach and Shane Steichen is a huge piece of this puzzle. And the other part is all those guys that you just mentioned that had bad years, they're expecting back year. They're expecting bounce back from Kenny Moore. They're expecting a bounce back from Ryan Kelly. They're expecting a bounce back from Quentin Nelson and a healthy Shaquille Leonard, which we'll get into, I'm sure, a little bit later. That's still in question. To me, that's the second biggest storyline this offseason behind the quarterback is, can Shaq Leonard come back and play at the level that he was at before? But if you add, the Pro Bowl levels of those guys who we've seen play who we've seen play Pro Bowls, and Kenny Moore and Shaq Leonard and Ryan Kelly and Quentin Nelson, there's your big offseason additions.
Right. And that's why, I don't mind. And I think 2023 should be basically a trial by fire. See what works and see what doesn't work. Again, the last few years, the Colts have gone all in. Really, since Frank Reich got there, it has been we're going for the playoffs, right? It's never kind of been, oh, well, we'll see what happens, or we're going to, we're a few years away. Andrew Luck in 2018 was a little tricky just because we had no idea what to expect. And you kind of quickly saw, even after a slow start, okay, this guy's got it back. And this is going to be a team that, if Andrew Luck is good, can be a playoff team. But they try to run it back and make a playoff run in 2019. They did the same thing in 2020 and 2021 and 2022. This is the first year in a long time where it's truly, let's see what develops. Let's see, with no expectations, how this roster looks. I like that. I like that approach because I think you kind of have to use year number one as an experimental year, and then you can start to chart your path forward of, these are cornerstone guys we're keeping and extending. These are guys that, okay, we gave them one more chance. It did not work out. We're not trying to win anyway this year with a rookie quarterback, especially. The wins are not going to matter as much as the development on the field. And so these guys did perform. We gave them a chance. Okay, let's move on. And now we can kind of go into the offseason with, this is an area of need and that's an area of need. I like 2023 being a trial by fire. I think it has to be, especially when you're talking about a new head coach and a new quarterback. Let the guys play and let them basically decide who is going to be in this roster and who is not. And just to finish quickly the rebuild point, look at the two teams in the division, the Texans and the Jaguars. The Jaguars had the number one pick, or at least a top 3 pick in the draft for years, right? For years. And nothing ever got fixed until Trevor Lawrence. And really, nothing ever got fixed, even with Trevor Lawrence, until Doug Peterson got there. So it's one of those things where you can strip it down. You can try to figure, you could try to, we're going to sell everyone off, and then we're going to, like the Jaguars did for a while, build on the defense and draft defensive guys for a while. But it took them a very long time. And it's not even when they got the quarterback, it's when they got the coach that really kind of things took off. And now all of a sudden you see them a playoff team. And this year, a team that is going to be on a short list in terms of Super Bowl contenders. And you got the Texans. Texans at the end of the Bill O'Brien era tore it down. And really, outside of Larry Tunsil, traded anyone that they possibly could with value and got them out of there, got a ton of picks. And that also led to 2 coaches in 2 years being there and being fired. Now it feels like for the first time, they have their head coach they believe in, DeMeco Ryans. 95% they're going to take a quarterback at pick number 2. So they're going to have now their quarterback of the future. So now they're finally going for it. But if you make the wrong pick at head coach, if DeMeco Ryans not as good as we think, or quarterback, and that guy just fails, all of that rebuilding was for naught. Like it's a waste. Then you have to restart all over again. And so it's just like one of those things. I don't mind to finish off the point in terms of the direction where we started, and DeForest Buckner kind of bringing this up in terms of he doesn't want to be in a rebuild. I don't think you have to declare a rebuild, because I think the true way you kind of get out of this rut the Colts have been in is sitting on the coach and the quarterback. Obviously, we'll see Shane Steichen be able to do that, and we'll see if he's able to develop whatever quarterback they take in the draft. That's going to truly be the determining factor of if this works or not. I don't think you have to trade Taylor, trade Michael Pittman Jr., trade DeForest Buckner, trade Shaq Leonard, try to, do what the Dolphins did and get like 5 first-round picks, or do what the Thunder are doing and get 40 first-round picks in the next few drafts there in the NBA and try to have this thing work out. If you hit the coach, you hit the quarterback, you could see things can turn very quickly. So I don't think you need to strip the roster down as much as maybe conventionally thought even like 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think the most important point there is just the coach and the quarterback. I mean, that's what wins in this league, and I think that's probably the only real through line for the last few Super Bowl champs. The Chiefs twice, the Rams, and the Bucks, and you're talking Bruce Arians, Sean McVay, and Andy Reid, and then Stafford, Brady, and Mahomes. So yeah, that's where it's at. Once again, the most important thing this team's going to do this entire offseason is select a quarterback. And, that's going to chart the path forward. All the rest of it will matter because you're going to have to shore up things around him. I think the one thing, just for me to close off this part of the argument, the one thing that concerns me about the path is that I don't know that the situation is all that great right now for the rookie coming into. There's not a lot of weapons, at least not proven weapons. It's still younger guys. You got a line that you're hoping is coming back to its, former self, but the last year and a half has not been good with them. So there's some concerns with protection. That duo there, if I had a rookie quarterback coming in, I'd feel better if I had a couple more weapons out there and if I had a little bit more competition on the offensive line. Now we'll see. Those things may get added during the draft. Ballard's shown in the past that he can add even into the summer on the offensive line. So, we'll see how all that works out. But right now, that's my one concern. I just wonder outside of the coaching staff, is this really a great landing spot for a rookie quarterback right now?
I would argue you think Jonathan Taylor would have a bounce back season. I like Michael Pittman Jr. I think he could be a very productive and very reliable receiver. I think, again, we talked about this on Tuesday's pod as well. Make sure to check it out, Blue Horseshoe Pod. That they definitely need still more weapons in the receiver room, and I think that will come as we go. But kind of like what the Eagles did, you had Jalen Hurts go through that first year. Now, granted, the roster in Philly for Jalen Hurts' first year as a starter compared to the rookie quarterback this year, the Philly roster is way better, right? Don't get me wrong. That roster is way better. But you saw the A.J. Brown trade for the Eagles last year happen a year after Jalen Hurts was in the system. I could see this time next year, if Chris Ballard is still the GM or if not, whoever the GM is, really then being aggressive and kind of seeing, okay, this is what a Shane Steichen offense looks like. This is what a Shane Steichen-led team looks like. Now let's go be aggressive in getting the pieces to fit that offense in. I think also part of it, like you hear the Colts talk about a lot, especially Shane Steichen, they're going to fit the offense to what the quarterback does. And so I think a little bit of the tricky part for the Colts right now, when you're a holding pattern, is we believe, I would say it's a pretty good chance it's going to be either Will Levis or Anthony Richardson. There's an opportunity where it could be CJ Stroud. There's still a chance it could be Hendon Hooker as well. 4 different quarterbacks. I think once you get the quarterback come draft night on your team, and then you see how you want to build the offense in the first year, I think that's when we could really see this team be aggressive in terms of then going to maybe get a receiver that fits what they want to do well. Or, get an offensive lineman, maybe a tackle that blocks in the scheme that they want to block in better than right now what they know. I'm sure they have an idea of the kind of Shane Steichen offense, right? You have a overall general picture, but I think once you get that quarterback on your roster, now okay, this is the guy we have and this is the style we're going for. Now we could start to fit the puzzle pieces around him. But I think in order to do that, I think first you need an idea, an identity of what the offense is going to look like. And that to me won't happen until you get that quarterback on your roster. And then you could really start to push forward here and build the offense in the identity of the quarterback. I want to ask you this.
Oh. That's very fair. And I think, talking about like the Steichen offensive line, from everything you hear, that he wants more athletic guys, more guys who can move, which the Colts have done a little bit in the past. Anyway, some of those guys are already here.
Right. Quentin Nelson is,
but I think even more in that, even more in that vein. And maybe those guys just aren't available right now.
Well, it's also true. And the free agent market was crap. Right. Mm-hmm. Like it was depleted. Not that the Colts are players in that pool anyway. But yeah, I think that's also part of it too. Just there's the availability right now is not where the Colts could have easily, I think, gotten a piece or two because there's so many guys out there and there's a surplus of valuable pieces that they could have added this offseason for sure. But I want to ask you this question about DeForest Buckner's comments, because he also hinted the fact that with Stephon Gilmore, it seemed like Stephon Gilmore wanted to go to a place entering year 12 where he could win right away. And DeForest Buckner again said he doesn't want to be in a rebuild, but you look, okay, it's a first-time head coach in Shane Steichen. 95% it's going to be a first-time rookie quarterback, or if not, it's going to be Gardner Minshew starting most of the year anyway. So either way, the quarterback tells you they're not ready to win in 2023. The head coach is new. How far away? Because DeForest Buckner doesn't at least seem to think that the Colts are in a rebuild. I mean, we just kind of talked about it. They're not sure. They're not stripping it down, but they're not exactly ready to win right now. So call it a retooling, call whatever you want. They're not a playoff team in 2023, probably not in 2024. How far away realistically do you think the Colts are from being a playoff contender again, to where DeForest Buckner can feel like, okay, now we're back to winning, and wins is the most important thing, not development?
I think based on Buckner's comments, I think he feels like 2 years. I think he's saying, because if you look at the difference that he was saying about he's in year 8 and Gilmore's in year 12, I think he's saying he's willing to not punt a year, but go through a year that you just described, where it's kind of an evaluation year. You're trying to see which of these young guys stick. You're trying to find out about this young quarterback. How does he tick? How can we make him better? Where do you need the improvements? I think best case scenario is 2 years on the exact plan that you just laid out. You come in this year and you're really saying, not that it's everyone for themselves, but you're really saying, prove it to me. Show me you belong on this team. Show me you're going to be a part of the next playoff team here in Indianapolis. And then next year, would be the expectation to go and chase that. I think realistically, it's probably going to be more like 3 or 4. I don't know how many times it's happened in the league in a year or two. We've seen it every year. There's somebody who goes from last place to, division champs. Jacksonville just went from the number 1 overall pick to the division title. So it's not out of the question that it would happen in 2. And I think that that's a realistic expectation. But I just looking at things right now and the way this team's not really been one to go in and spend. You look at that Jacksonville offseason, every one of those moves didn't hit. I think they already cut Shaquille Griffin, for instance. But they went out and spent a lot of money, and that played a role in them going from the number 1 overall pick to where they were. Getting Doug Peterson played a big role in that. The jump for Trevor Lawrence played a big role in that. But does it happen without Christian Kirk? They got killed for him. Why did you spend that money on him? And it may still be a contract that was more than it should have been, but they knew they needed that piece in particular to get this quarterback where he needed to go. I still have doubt the Colts will do that, and we'll see. I don't know. I still have doubts that they'll go and overspend for a guy like that. I think it's still going to be the Isaiah McKenzies of the world that are coming through here. And that's why I think it's going to be closer to 3 or 4 years, because I think it's going to be more of a draft driven, rise. And there's nothing wrong with that. That usually sticks a little bit longer. A lot of these teams that spend the big money, find themselves in the situation the Rams are right now, which I still would say is not a bad situation. You've got a Super Bowl title. You still got a pretty good quarterback, and you obviously are willing to spend and trade assets, bring in more good players. But that's what usually happens. It's not going to be a 5 or 10 year run. It's going to be a 2 or 3 year run when you bring in the big money guys. But I do think, those are the trade-offs, I guess, in both of those approaches. You bring in the big money guys, you can win faster, but your window is going to be shorter. If you do it through the draft, it's going to take longer to get to where you're winning most of the time. But your window is going to be longer if your quarterback doesn't retire at 29.
That is also true. I will say realistically, if you have Hendon Hooker, Will Levis, or Anthony Richardson as your quarterback, I would say 2025. That's the year where the Colts, I think, can go in there with legitimate and realistic expectations to be a playoff team. If CJ Stroud somehow falls and you're able to get him at 3 or 4, I think you can bump that up to 2024. I think you can use CJ Stroud's rookie year as a litmus test. And again, have everyone on the roster in 2023, like I said, basically play for your contract and see who's going to stay and who's going to go. I do think we will see bounce back years from Michael Pittman Jr., Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, Shaq Leonard, I think, will be back, and assuming he's ready to go, at least if 2023 is a year where he knocks the rust off, I feel confident saying that in 2024, he'll be back to that all-pro level that we've seen. You give Kwity Paye and Dio Odengbo another year to develop. Like, I really do think 2023 can be a developmental year, especially with Stroud. And I think 2024, you can go in there legitimately thinking we can get a wild card spot. We can be in the mix here to go, make the postseason run. Because I think he's the most pro ready. I think he'll play from week 1, CJ Stroud. And I think, obviously, he's the second best quarterback in this draft class. But if you do get a project, if you do someone like Anthony Richardson, who will not start right away, Hendon Hooker, who will miss time with an injury, and even Will Levis, even if Will Levis plays right away, I still think he needs developmental time and still is one of those guys that will need more time to develop and is not as pro ready as a guy like CJ Stroud. So I think 2025 realistically is, for those 3 quarterbacks, time where you can kind of circle and say, this is when we're going to be playoff contenders. And if DeForest Buckner's okay with waiting another 2 years before you kind of get to a season where there are legitimate expectations, God bless him. He'll be 31 by then. And if you want to stick around, go for it. But I do think 3 years for the most part, again, outside of the luck of Stroud dropping you again, I think 3 years is realistic where the Colts should be. And I hope, again, I don't have a problem with that, George. Like, I don't know if you do or you think it should be better. Like, I don't right now have a problem being patient if there is a real plan in place and you see legitimate progress. Like, if they have a plan with Anthony Richardson where they tell you, first 12 games, we're going to sit him, develop him, we'll play him a little bit, kind of get his feet wet, use the last month of the season as kind of a testing ground. And then 2024, it's really going to be, okay, what can we kind of get out of him? What can we really see from him? I have no problem with a plan if you actually have an end goal in 2025 and you're going to make moves to get to where you want. So I don't have a problem being patient. And that's why I think 2025 is realistic. And I don't think it's it's too rushed, and I don't think it's too long either.
I think if you draft a rookie quarterback, you have to be patient. I mean, Joe Burrow got hurt during his rookie season, but he also went through rookie growing pains. I think they won 4 games that year, maybe 3, something along those lines. It was a rough year,
It was a rough
and I
year.
think that's what you expect. You start a rookie quarterback. One of the trade-offs that you're going to do there is they're going to make mistakes, and you understand that, and you're going to live with that because you're hoping that those mistakes are going to make them better down the road. Now, year 2, the Bengals go to the Super Bowl. And year 3, they go to the AFC Championship game and are, maybe one really poor decision from a defensive lineman away from going back to the Super Bowl. So, obviously it's worked really quickly there. And it was mostly a draft-driven rise. I mean, it's Burrow and Chase. That's really what's fueling that. There's been some free agents in there, but not really big name, off the charts, and they've even lost a couple of guys. I mean, Carl Lawson, I think, was rising defensive end for them and went to the Jets, and they've been able to overcome that and just keep on growing. So I think it can work even on the draft side quickly if you hit on your picks and you, like you said, if you have a plan in a really detailed one. And I think also it helps if you have an extra special quarterback. I would put Burrow right up there at the top of the league, top 5-ish kind of a guy. And that's where it gets back to. And I'm going to harp on this all off season, but that's where it gets back to. I'd be a lot more willing to be patient had they traded up to number 1. You are counting on a quarterback that the rest of the league chose for you to develop and to build around. Including one of the teams in your division that help shape which quarterback you're getting here. That's a dangerous game to play. That's at the end of the day, I think that's where a lot of my pessimism for this offseason comes from. I'm still not convinced. Yeah, it's a deep quarterback class on paper. One of the deeper ones in a while, honestly. I can't remember really the last time they were talking about 4 quarterbacks in the top 4. I know that's never happened. But even 4 quarterbacks in the top 10 is an ultra rare situation. Now, will they all hit? History says no. 1 will, maybe 2. And now I think the Colts have got to hope that they've got one of those guys. If they do, this process moves up exponentially. If that guy is the right guy and you're able to build around him the way you were talking, the way the Bengals did, get those pieces in place that fill the holes, and then it can happen really quick. If it takes a little longer with that guy, I think that's something that fans need to be patient with. That's where I think the patience comes into play, because and Ballard's been setting the table for that. He's been saying, don't rush the judgment. That too many times, want to throw the rookies out because they have a bad first year or sometimes a bad first month. And I remember people were trying to throw Jamar Chase out of Cincinnati in the preseason. You remember that?
Because he couldn't catch the ball without the college white stripes on it.
Right. So I think that worked out okay. So we'll see. I mean, I think that's where the patience comes into play. So we got to understand it's not always the Joe Burrow model. Tua is, I think, a good example. Still not quite. Take away the concussion element, which is horrible and frightening and changes a lot of things here. But just what he's done on the field, there's been a steady progression. And I think you're still, if Miami's being honest, they're still not 100% sure what they've got. Things are trending in the right direction outside of health, which is a major question mark. But just for terms of this argument, even without that component, there's still some questions. There's good. It's moving in the right direction, but I think that's more often the way this goes. Even Josh Allen was a little bit of an accelerated run, and he took a little while. It was a year or 2.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Before he hit. So I think that's something that's going to be important to keep in mind for all of us, media involved, that hey, it's not necessarily going to happen overnight.
Wins and losses in 2023 are irrelevant. So I think the expectation should be, or the goal should be like the Bears, where they have Justin Fields. And I know he's been there a little bit before, but last year, especially with Justin Fields, with a new coaching staff, really got the reins for the first time, and the Bears sucked, right? They had the number 1 overall pick. But at least if you're Chicago, you felt good enough that we have a guy we believe in that we're going to start to build around. We have seen enough, even though the wins weren't there, we've seen enough to where we think we put weapons and continue to develop him. He will be one of, the best franchise quarterbacks in the league, and he could be our guy for the next decade. So even though the wins were not there and the Bears had the number 1 overall pick, they're able to use that year last year as, okay, a breeding ground, a building ground. This is what we like. He's our guy. Now we're going to get, we're going to get assets and we're going to make moves to now build around him. Fields still has question marks, but at least the Bears felt confident enough that this is our guy. If we could sit here this time next year, George, and I don't care if the Colts are 0-17, but if they feel good enough that Richardson, Levis, Hooker, CJ Stroud is their guy moving forward, that to me is a win. That is a win in 2023. If you feel like, okay, there is definitely so far we've seen enough to where we feel like we can go ahead and move forward with this quarterback. And if we put him in the right situation, he will succeed. So which goes back to patience and goes back to 2023 being a prove-it year where wins do not matter. It's the first time in a long time, and it's not refreshing, but that at least having the bar low and seeing that direction, that's at least, as a fan, gives me reason for optimism going ahead.
Fields is a really good example because the Bears weren't ready for him as a rookie. They didn't have a plan. They were going to redshirt him. He didn't do much at all in training camp. They were going to roll with Andy Dalton. He was going to be their guy. And then when Fields got in there, he was running Andy Dalton's offense. He wasn't running an offense that highlighted his strengths. And I think that's another key element. We're talking about this rebuild versus remodel versus retool, whatever you want to call it. We know where DeForest Buckner stands on this, but
right,
whatever you want to call it, having that plan for the quarterback is essential. And I think that's going to be the most important element of this. You can't bring in the 4 guys that you talked about earlier, Richardson, Levis, Stroud, Hooker. You can't bring in one size fits all there. That's not the way it's going to work. They each need, for various reasons, a different plan around them, a different, you're going to run the ball more with some of them. You're going to throw the ball. You want it out more quickly with some of them. You're going to emphasize the deep ball more with some of them. I felt like the Bears, when they brought in Justin Fields, it was almost like they weren't even ready to draft a rookie quarterback. It was sort of like they were just sitting there on draft day and were like, oh, he's falling. Let's just go get him. And there was no plan. Nope. And they wasted that first year. And then the coaching staff gets fired and you bring in Matt Eberflus. And then you had a second year of pain to finally get to where you hope you're building forward. The Colts have to avoid that. It won't be the coach that pays the price here. I think it'll be the GM in this case, given where the Colts are and coming off of last year. If you bring in a quarterback now at 4 this year and you don't have a plan and it's a wasted year, I think that's what would cost Chris Ballard his job. And I don't think they'll do that, but there is a little bit of a danger there because they've not picked a lane with the quarterback. They haven't said, we're going to be aggressive. This is the guy we want. When you let a guy fall to you, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out because you're going to have to put that plan together. And it didn't start in January. It's going to start on April 27th when he's picked.
So we'll get into Shane Steichen's comments here in a little bit. For me, it was telling in one way, at least revealed one thing about their thinking in the draft. I'll tell you what that is here in a little bit. But speaking of quarterbacks and development and getting them, to play at a level where you feel good enough for them to, move forward and be the guy, that also involves having weapons around them to make them better. Jonathan Taylor is there. We know Michael Pittman Jr. is also there. And Michael Pittman Jr. was one of the players who did meet the media on Wednesday, George. He was asked about a contract extension, gave the classic cliche player answer of, I don't want to get into that, so I pay my agent. He takes care of that messy stuff. I just want to focus on football. He did mention, which I thought was interesting, that there have been at least preliminary talks at different points in the offseason about, broaching a contract extension. But it has been so far 3 years for Michael Pittman Jr., where it's been up and down production. I think more of that is on the quarterback than him. But would you, George, do you think Michael Pittman Jr. so far has done enough to deserve a contract extension? Or kind of what we were just talking about before, is this a prove-it year for a lot of people? Forget just being on the roster in 2024. Is this going to be a prove-it year for Pittman to say, hey, do you or can you show that you deserve the big money?
Yeah, it's tough because, like you said, the evaluation is so hard here with the ever-changing quarterbacks, and especially this last year, 3 guys in 1 year. and none of them really taking advantage of the deep ball. So he had 99 catches, but he didn't have 1,000 yards, which is really, really rare. Um, I I think I would not probably re-sign him just yet because you've only got one really good year out of three, and there's reasons for that we just detailed. But now you've got a rookie quarterback, and I think it goes back to what you said at the very beginning here, which I think is a really salient point, and I think it's something that's we're gonna see play out, this evaluation factor, and who works well with this rookie quarterback. I think that's a big part now with Pittman. If you get this rookie in here and you start to see that connection that Andrew Luck and T.Y. Hilton had right away. Even Wentz had a good connection early on with Pittman. If you see that kind of connection, I think that's going to be a big determining factor. But if the kid clicks more with, Pierce, for instance, maybe it leads you the other way. So I do think this is one of those wait and see. And, Pittman pretty much said that. One of his other comments was that if he produces, that's what leads to the contract. So, go out and have a big year, and then they'll want to bring you back. I think he understands. His dad was in the league for 11 years as a running back. I'm sure he's talked to him about these kind of situations, and I think he knows. He can talk all he wants in the media. He can lobby for a contract, and it wouldn't lead anywhere. So he's not even trying. And I think he's made the right approach. He's basically said, look, my agent will handle that. My job is to go out and be the best I can be on the field. What I thought was interesting about Pittman this year is he stayed in Indy. Normally he's out in California. Now his wife's pregnant. He did kind of drop that bomb too. He's going to have a second child here. I think he said next month. So I'm sure that factored into it. You probably don't want to travel as much in that situation, but it's interesting. He's been around the building. He was at the combine. He was on the field before the quarterbacks threw, talking to some of those guys down there, mostly hanging out with his receivers coach, Reggie Wayne. But that kind of thing is different, and I think it shows a commitment on his part to, it just feels like a lot of this offseason has been him trying to show this team that he's going to be there for them. He's always been a leader. Reggie Wayne talked about him being the leader of that room last year. He's a young guy, but I think he's trying to be even more of that person, and I think that factors into this as well. But I really think at the end of the day, his extension is dependent on how he clicks with the rookie quarterback.
I would give an extension because I think this year you can get him on the cheap. Like we've seen, right, wide receiver salaries explode. He's not going to be in the Tyreek Hill $30 million a year range, right? That's obviously off the board, not a question. But if you can get him, I don't know, 5 for 90, somewhere in that range, like I think he's exactly what you want, exactly what you need, where he's one of those tough, hard-nosed, over-the-middle receivers. He's not a burner, but he gets you a lot of those tough catches. And I think he could be one of those guys that, especially when you get a quarterback there for more than 1 year, and you can get a little bit more chemistry developed, I think he's going to be that go-to third down receiver, 3rd and 7, slide in the middle, boom, there's Michael Pittman Jr. coming up clutch. I think he will be that security blanket for whichever young quarterback the Colts do get. So I think we'll see a bounce back, even with a rookie quarterback, and those kind of sometimes always volatile with how they play. I think we could see a bounce back year from Michael Pittman Jr. And if I'm Chris Ballard, I would get to work now just to try to get a discount compared to if he goes over 1,000 yards and enters free agency. Now you get a little bit more of a bidding war compared to what you could do now. And again, when you have a rookie quarterback on a rookie deal, you're able to give Michael Pittman Jr. money. You can give Jonathan Taylor an extension because right now, at least for the next 3 or 4 years, you have a quarterback in the most important position and the most expensive position, the cheapest you could possibly get. I would take advantage of that now. And again, assuming the money is not insane, right? Assuming Michael Pittman Jr. is not sitting there asking for top 5 wide receiver money, I would try to get a deal done now because I think you can get a cheaper deal done and maybe a little bit of a discount now while the stock is a little bit low coming off a down year compared to what you would get if he does have a great year and now you're bidding against other teams in free agency this time next year.
I mean, I do think that's the strategy that you want to use, and it's the way most teams go. I just don't think Pittman's of that mindset. I mean, again, his dad played in the league. He's a really savvy guy. I don't think he's going to be willing to take a discount. I think I really, from the way he talked, I think he's more of the mindset of bet on myself, go out there, have the big year, and make them pay me. But we'll see how it plays out. I think you got to try it. I just think I think with the way uh the intelligence that Pittman has, the maturity that Pittman has, the history that he's seen with his dad in this league and his dad's teammates, and understanding really the way the business works, I think he's a guy that's going to want to bet on himself. And that's what I took away from his comments the other day, that he's willing to just say, you know what, I'm going to roll with it. There's going to be a rookie quarterback. He did say that Shane Steichen's going to throw the ball a lot, and he's excited about that. I think he's going to bet on himself and try to, make the Colts or whoever pay up for his services.
That's the case. And nothing you can do, right, if you're Chris Ballard, but I would at least try. And like I said, try to get in the door now quickly before, like I said, if they're throwing the ball a lot and Pittman is getting a lot of catches and getting a lot of yards and driving that price up, that's for sure. Speaking of Shane Steichen, like you mentioned, Michael Pittman Jr. seems so far very excited in the early days of how this offense is going to look. I thought Shane Steichen made some interesting comments, not exactly surprising, not exactly different, but he was asked, are you interested in Lamar Jackson? And basically his answer was, we're focused on the draft, we're focused on the guys we have in the building. At this point, George, with 2 weeks to go for the draft, exactly as we record here on Thursday, I get the sense between what Shane Steichen has repeatedly said, we're focused on the guys in the draft, what Chris Ballard has said, what Jim Irsay has said, and he has made it known that he is very excited to draft a quarterback in this draft. I have gotten to the point where I think there's only 3 quarterbacks the Colts will take, and I think there's no chance they will pass on a quarterback at pick 3 or pick 4. I think the only 3 quarterbacks now that are realistic options for the Colts are C.J. Stroud, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson. I don't see a situation where, even if they don't trade up to number 3, and let's say the Titans do it, I don't see a situation where at 4 they trade back, don't take a quarterback, and draft Will Anderson or the best defensive player on the board. I don't see a situation where then they try to gamble and either pick 35 or trade back up into the first round and try to get Hendon Hooker. I think with the way you've heard everyone talk, I'm going to put the pieces together as, to me, that leads to they are dead set on taking a quarterback. They're going to take one either at pick 3 or pick 4. And I think we could confidently either at pick 1 or pick 2 say Bryce Young's going to be off the board because the Panthers or Texans are going to take him. I think whether it's Will Levis that's sitting there at 4, whether it's Anthony Richardson, or whether it's C.J. Stroud, I don't think the Colts pass up, but I do think they take a quarterback. So I get it. It's not earth-shattering. Shane Steichen has really not changed much from the company line when he said that. But I think, to me, that just when you hear the Colts talk about draft, I don't think they're going to risk in passing on a quarterback at 4 to hope to get maybe even Will Levis later on in the first round, or try to get Hendon Hooker in the second round. George, do you think at pick 4, even if 3 quarterbacks are off the board, are you confident right now the Colts will take a quarterback at 4 no matter what happens the first 3 picks?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I do think we saw Shane Steichen close the door on Lamar Jackson. We know that. That those comments, not that door was very wide open anymore anyway.
Not a shock, exactly.
He just sort of locked the already closed door there. But I do think they will, because I agree with everything you just said. I think that I think there's 3 guys. I think it's those 3 guys. And I think that's where Jim Irsay's confidence is coming from. I think they have, over the course of the past month or so since the combine, month and a half, whatever it's been, that they've come to the conclusion that they like all 3 of these guys. And again, we talked about it briefly on the last pod. I think there's reasons why. It's accuracy with CJ Stroud, it's ceiling and upside with Anthony Richardson, and it's leadership with Will Levis. I think they feel like that one outstanding trait from each of them is worth it, at number 4. And it's something that Shane Steichen can build around and that they can win with. I do think there should be a question, though. If quarterbacks go 1, 2, and 3, which I think in and of itself is unprecedented. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I know quarterbacks have never gone 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't think they've ever gone 1, 2, and 3.
We had in 2020.
Did we?
Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance.
See, that's why I traded up. Not thinking of Zach Wilson as a quarterback, clearly. So it has happened 1, 2, and 3.
When the cord was pulled that fast, it's easy to forget about him.
No, and that's a good point. So, it has happened. 4 has never happened. That much we know. And there's a lot of talk it could happen this year. I think probably if I'm a betting man, I think it will happen if somebody trades up with Arizona at 3. I think there will be quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, and 4 for why you just said. But I think they're going to have a long conversation about Will Anderson. And it goes back to your patience mantra. Just because if you really believe that Will Anderson is the best defender in this draft, and some people say the best player in this draft, and he's sitting there at 4, I know you're going to get roasted by the media, by the fan base. It will be a very unpopular pick in the moment, but so is Donovan McNabb in Philly. So I don't know how much you worry about that if you have the conviction. I think you have to have that conversation because that's probably the next most important spot to fill in the NFL is that elite pass rusher. And if that guy's staring you in the face and you don't believe Richardson or Levis is elite, that's the big question. If you don't believe that they are next level, you at least have to have that conversation about Will Anderson. I think ultimately they'll still choose a quarterback. Obviously, that position is of utmost importance, and I think it's very clear that the owner is on board with that approach and is driving that train right now. But I think you at least have to talk about Will Anderson and consider moving the quarterback decision to 2024.
Does your answer change depending on who is there? Like, is that if Anthony Richardson is off the board, or is that still, hey, let's say Will Levis goes number 3, and you're sitting there either Anthony Richardson or Will Levis, Anthony Richardson or Will Anderson Jr. at pick number 4. Are you saying that you have to consider Will Anderson Jr. just if it's him or Levis? Or are you saying even if it's Richardson or Levis, doesn't matter, you still have to have a long, hard conversation if quarterbacks go 1, 2, and 3, that you should take Anderson over the 4th quarterback that's right now there, assuming Stroud and Young, bare minimum, are the first 2 off the board?
Yeah, for me, it would be Levis. If
Okay.
Richardson's there, I think you still got to take the upside. There is just it's too enticing to not take him at 4, even with Will Anderson there. But with Levis, it's not that there is an upside. There is. Those 23 turnovers, the 23 interceptions the last 2 years really caused me concern, especially when, again, as I talked about earlier in the show, the GM has repeatedly said that's why things didn't work last season. I would I'm not saying I would take Will Anderson. I want to make that clear. It would be a hard decision for me. I would take a long look at that one. Because obviously if you do take Will Anderson, you've still got that problem at quarterback. You're pretty much guaranteeing that you're moving on to another guy again in 2024. And I think that would be 9 straight years. It's starting to be like that Browns jersey now that was out there. So I get it. There's a case to make it Levis no matter what. But if it was Will versus Will, I would sit down and have a real strong conversation. And that's not a knock on Levis. I think he's got a chance to do really well in this league and to be a guy who leads teams to the playoffs on a perennial basis. He seems like I think he scored a 93 on the S2. I think that leaked. So he's a very smart kid, clearly. He seems really driven. I know that's a piece that Shane Steichen's talked about a lot, is the obsession. He seems to have that. It's hard to gauge, but just the way he talks about the game, it feels like he's going to be one of those guys that, is out there till midnight throwing with Michael Pittman if he thinks he needs to be. But Will Anderson is generational here. I feel like he's gotten lost in the sauce here a little bit because of all the quarterback talk. It would be a tough call for me.
Look, my feelings on Caleb Williams and punting to 2024. He is the guy, George, every single time, right? We talk about it. You always give the 2 fingers to the fight on. That is, with Bryce Young out of the picture, that to me is the best case scenario now going forward, is getting Caleb Williams in 2024. But at this point, if you're the Colts, I would, if it was me, if I was Chris Ballard, I would take a quarterback at 4 no matter what. Just because best case scenario, the team stinks and you get the first overall pick and you can get Caleb Williams and you can trade whoever you take, Richardson or Levis, ship them off. Worst case scenario, you don't take a quarterback, you win 5 games, 4 games, maybe, let's say, and you miss out on the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. And now you're sitting there at pick 3 or 4. maybe you're not in the area for Drake May, and the two teams that are there are not trading down like the Bears just were at the pick number 1. So you don't have any way to get pick number 1 or pick number 2, and you miss the two best quarterbacks in that draft class. And now you're sitting there again, hands out, empty-handed, not knowing what you're going to do at quarterback. I hate to just take a quarterback, but at this point, I've resigned to the fact that if I was at pick 4, even if it's Will Levis, who's someone that we've talked about on the pod a lot, not a big fan of, I would take him. Hope, try to develop him. Believe in Shane Steichen that he can get the best of any quarterback. And at least if, again, you win 3, 4, or 5 games next year, you at least have something to look at quarterback-wise rather than going to 2024 hoping to get a number 1 overall pick and not getting it. That is. I just don't want to go into next year hoping to get a quarterback, trying to tank it basically, and this team being better than we think. Some of the guys playing better, and again, even though you're still bad, you're talking about a 5-12 team, not good enough to get the number 1 or number 2 overall pick, and it's still then another situation where your quarterback situation is not fully solved. So that's why at this point,
quarterback is the right move here. I want to be clear on that because of everything you just said. I mean, it's just been the carousel's been rolling here for a while, and the owner's definitely on board with the quarterback. We know that. But for me, Will Anderson would come into the conversation. I don't think he will on draft night. I really don't. I don't think it'll be a conversation in the war room. I want to be clear on that too.
The other thing I want to say quickly, because I thought, like we talked about this a few weeks ago, I thought to me, best case scenario, you could say is stick in at 4, maybe Will Anderson Jr. Then getting Hendon Hooker at pick 35 in round 2. Also, it's kind of moved me off of Hendon Hooker. It's just not his play or his himself. Right now, you're hearing his name a ton. There's a lot of buzz around Hendon Hooker. So my fear is if you go Will Anderson Jr. at 4, I don't know. Like, I don't think the Colts can then afford to wait to pick 35 for Hendon Hooker to come and sit in your lap. I think a team's going to be aggressive, either trading above the Colts in round 2 or trading back into the first round to get Hendon Hooker. And at that point, like, I just don't see the reason to pass on a quarterback than to just use that pick 35 to trade back into the first round and give up more draft assets to go get Hendon Hooker at, I don't know, pick 20 or 25, something like that. That would have been, if you could tell me guaranteed you can get Hendon Hooker at pick 35, I'm in, then go Will Anderson at 4 and get Hendon Hooker in the second round. Just right now with the buzz you're hearing, a lot of stock kind of riding up for Hendon Hooker, I just would not feel comfortable right now if I'm Chris Ballard banking on the fact that Hooker will be there in the second round. And I think that means you have to give up draft capital to move over to get him. And at that point, just take then the quarterback that's sitting there at 4. We don't have to give up anything to go get him.
Yeah. No, and my plan for a long time was Will Anderson and then Hendon Hooker. And I am leery of it for the same reason. I just wonder how much that's true. I mean, there's still some real question marks with Hooker. The age, is going to come up a lot. The injury is obviously concerning. There's a lot of question about that Tennessee offense. He took that head on at the combine. So I don't know, but I'm still with you. As much as I sit there and say I'm not sure that he'll actually go in the first round, that's not just April lying that happens around here. I don't know if I'm confident enough in that to actually risk it. If I was Chris Ballard, to actually say, okay, well, I'll call the league's bluff. I'll go ahead and draft Will Anderson and see what happens. I don't know if I would do that.
Same. At this point, I would not either. I am buying into, maybe we're letting like I said, the lying season impact me too much, but it's a big risk to pass and then hope he's going to be there. It's good. It's tough, but yeah, I would at this point just say quarterback at pick 4. We're going to do it. I think the way you hear Shane Steichen, Chris Ballard, Jim Irsay, all kind of talking about draft. I don't think you put all that focus and attention on taking a quarterback in the draft with your plan being, we're going to take Hendon Hooker pick 35. I think you're going to go for the bird in the hand, which is going to be at pick 4. Take whoever is there. Maybe you trade up to number 3 if the board breaks your way. But either way, pick 3, pick 4. I feel 100% in saying they're taking a quarterback with that pick. All right.
Would the most chaos-inducing move be if they took Hooker at 4? I don't think that'll happen, but would that be the most chaotic thing that could happen on draft day? I would say there's less than a 1% chance of that.
I think taking Will Anderson Jr. would cause more chaos than taking Hendon Hooker. But it's close, though. It's close. There would be
I'm always looking for chaos. That's always fun. So what would cause the most
I like
chaos?
the storms. Yeah, that's a good question. Wow, what would cause? I think it would be Will Anderson Jr. because it's not a quarterback. But Hendon Hooker, for taking that is definitely by far the most waves you can make if you're Chris Ballard in terms of taking a quarterback. For sure. There's no other, they're not trading up to number 2. They're not getting Bryce Young. They're not trading to number 1. The Panthers at this point are not trading down, even though they were open to it, or at least allegedly, reportedly open to it earlier this year.
That would have been so weird.
Trade up to number 1. Oh, actually, we're going to drop down back to number 4. Yeah, that would have caused some waves for sure. But maybe that's a poll question we could put out there, George. Just to get.
I was going to say, you want to ask the Colts Nation here?
Yeah.
What would be more chaotic? What would be a more chaotic pick at number 4? Will Anderson Jr. or Hendon Hooker?
Please let us know. We can actually talk about that, I think, more on the next pod when we drop on Tuesday. But let us know. Tweet us at GM Bremers. You can find George on Twitter. Find me at Ryan_Hickey, number 3. Comment on our YouTube section. What is more chaotic, Anderson or Hooker? Where you can find us on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod. Make sure you subscribe while you're there. All of our podcasts are in video form on YouTube as well. And make sure you leave us a review on Spotify and Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Blue Horseshoe Pod with the bright blue logo is where you can find our brand new feed. And that's where every single new episode gets dropped off to. So let us know on social media, on YouTube, wherever you get your pods, what in your mind would be a more chaotic move? Will Anderson Jr. at pick number 4 or Hendon Hooker? On that note, we'll let you think about it. We'll let you discuss in your brain, get your answer. We'll give you the full weekend to do so. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you again on Tuesday right here on the Blue Horseshoe Podcast.